All right, let's get right into it. We're about to unpack one of the biggest financial earthquakes of our time. This is the story of how the American dream turned into a global nightmare.
You know, at its core, this whole thing really is about a dream, the American dream. But it's also about how that dream got twisted, how it was packaged up, sold off, and in the end, used against the very people who were chasing it. So to understand what happened, we have to go back to the days after September 11th, 2001. The whole country was shaken, the economy was in trouble, and the government knew it had to do something, anything really, to get things moving again and restore some confidence. And that something came from America's central bank, the Federal Reserve. Their big move was simple, and it was fast. Make it incredibly cheap to borrow money. And when I say cheap, I mean, look at this. They slashed interest rates from 6.5% all the way down to just 1%. Suddenly, the entire financial system was flooded with easy, cheap cash. And for the banks? Well, they saw a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. What happened next can only be described as a mortgage gold rush. I mean, with all this cheap money sloshing around, banks started handing out home loans on a scale nobody had ever seen, and they were giving them to pretty much everyone. And this slide just shows you how insane the lending got. This is a real example, by the way. Someone making just $28,000 a year got approved for a $720,000 loan. You didn't need to prove your income, you didn't need a good credit score. Honestly, if you had a pulse, you could get a loan. No questions asked. These were called subprime mortgages. They were basically designed for people who were very likely to have trouble paying them back. So you're probably asking, why on earth would a bank make such a risky loan? Well, here's the kicker. They had absolutely no intention of keeping it. And this is the playbook. It was genius, in a way. First, the local banks would take thousands of these risky home loans and bundle them all together into one giant package. Then they'd sell that entire package to a big Wall Street investment bank. And finally, Wall Street would chop up that package and sell the little pieces to investors all over the world. Just like that, the risk was off their books, problem solved. Or so they thought. Now, these bundles had a fancy, complicated name, collateralized debt obligations, or CDOs. But here's where the whole thing goes from risky to just completely reckless. To make these bundles of bad loans seem safe, the banks paid rating agencies to stamp them with the highest possible safety rating. That's right, AAA. Let that sink in. This is the same rating they give to super safe US government bonds. They were essentially calling a ticking time bomb a solid gold bar. It was one of the safest investments in the world, they said. All of this cheap money and crazy lending created a massive housing bubble. Prices just shot through the roof. People started buying houses not to live in them, but just to flip them a few months later for a huge profit. The whole country had turned into a giant casino. And, as long as the music was playing, everybody was dancing. But then, around 2006, the music started to get a little quieter. It began slowly. A few homeowners started missing their payments, then a few more. One foreclosure became 10, then 100, then thousands. The whole system, which was built on this one deeply flawed belief that house prices would never go down, started to tremble. The first real public sign that something was seriously wrong came in the summer of 2007. Two huge hedge funds at the big investment bank Bear Stearns, which were packed full of these mortgage products, just suddenly collapsed. The alarm bells were finally ringing on Wall Street. But even as these alarms were going off, the official story was, don't worry. The head of the Federal Reserve at the time, Ben Bernanke, actually told Congress that the problem would probably be contained. As we all know now, he couldn't have been more wrong. And that brings us to the moment the dam finally broke. September 15th, 2008. This is the night the world changed, and it all centered on one of the oldest, most respected names on Wall Street, Lehman Brothers. To really get the shock of this, you have to understand the scale. We're talking about a company that was 158 years old. It had survived world wars, the Great Depression. It was a titan with over $639 billion in assets. It was thought to be untouchable, too big to fail. And then it was gone, just like that. In a single night, Lehman Brothers filed for the biggest bankruptcy in American history. The impossible had just happened. By the next morning, the panic went global. Stock markets everywhere, London, Tokyo, you name it. They just went into a complete free fall. There was no containing it.
The financial infection that started in American suburbs had officially spread across the entire planet. So, what came next was the reckoning. This next part is about the fallout, the unbelievable human cost, the controversial rescue mission, and the big question of who, if anyone, would be held accountable.
Well, the US government stepped in with a massive rescue plan, $700 billion. But this money wasn't for the homeowners who were losing everything. It was a taxpayer-funded bailout for the exact same banks whose gambling had caused the collapse in the first place.
And while the banks were getting their bailout, this was the reality for everyday people. Unemployment shot up to 10%. 9 million jobs just gone. 10 million families lost their homes. Retirement accounts, college funds, people's entire life savings were wiped out. Which brings us to the big central question. Accountability.
How many of them actually
The government
went to prison?
investigated hundreds
One.
of the top financial...
Just one. And it wasn't a CEO of a major bank. It wasn't a chairman. It was a single mid-level executive. That's it.
So let's look at the final scorecard. Over $19 trillion in wealth for ordinary families just vanished. 10 million homes lost, 9 million jobs gone, and only one banker jailed. It's easy for these numbers to just wash over you, but you have to remember, every single one of those numbers represents a real family whose life was turned upside down. And this really leads to the most chilling takeaway from all this. The idea that this catastrophe wasn't a bug in the system. It wasn't some fluke or an accident. It was the system working perfectly, exactly as it was designed to. And that's a thought that should probably keep all of us up at night.